70. You look just as good as when you first met in your 20s. There you go. Well, congratulations on your 70th birthday, Stuart, and hope you had a good birthday. It's good to see you all today, and hope that you've had a terrific week, and hope that you've had a good blessing so far in your worship service. And it's great to be here to worship God, isn't it? And today, you know, I don't know if you sort of watch the Easter messages on TV that were given by the various churches, but, you know, they weren't exactly inspiring, for me anyway. And, you know, people today, you know, the secular world offers a story to connect into, for us to connect into. And we live in that world, the secular world, that that entices us to connect to. And sometimes when you listen to the Easter story or the Easter messages, I wonder how much connection there is with that message, that connection into that story of Easter. Put aside the pagan festival aside, you know, put all that aside, please. Don't get diverted with that. But how much do we actually really connect with that? As we live in this world, is that story of Easter real, or is it just another story that sits side by side with the story of the secular world, the story of the secular world that offers us fulfillment through vocation, health, family, money, position, power, all those sorts of things. That can be quite enticing. What story do we most identify with? We need to really tap into and rediscover the story that Jesus offers us. Because if we are to share that, it has to be real. Has to be real. Anyway, that's what we're going to have a wee look today. So that's sort of giving you a little bit of a preview. But I'm going to take you to a tin pot little town that I'm sure that you probably haven't heard of. And this is a place called Kujwak. And it's this place here, where's that? There, Kujwak, right on the top of Canada. So you got Hudson Bay here, you got Hudson Bay over here, Quebec, Montreal, and it's about 2,000 k north to Kujwak. And that's a regional capital of that area up the top there. And there's 2,668 people who live there. And you'd wonder why you would ever live there. You know what fascinates me about these places? Why would you ever live in such a cold climate? Why would you do that? You know, in winter, you know, the average temperature in January is minus 29. But it gets up to, you know, minus 20, you know, during the day. You know, you break out the slip, slop, slap, wouldn't you? You know, she's, yeah, you know, she's, I spoke to a lady in North New Zealand, and she spent a couple of years up in Baffin Island. It was actually this little tin pot little town up here. And she spent a couple of years there. And I said, what made you do it? She said, oh, just for experience, to see what it was like. And she said, oh, life can be pretty difficult, you know, just with basic things. I said, oh, you know, tell us about some of those challenges. Well, have you ever broken water pipe in winter? What do? Well, what do you do? And of course, you know, flushing toilets and things like frozen. Anyway, I don't know how they cope with all that sort of stuff. But at minus 29, things wouldn't work all that well, and they don't. And they don't work all that well in those sorts of climate. But, it can actually get quite warm in summer with these southerly winds, but with Hudson Bay to your left there, that freezes in winter and they get the westerly winds that come off that makes it particularly cold. Now, let me show you some pictures of it there. That's what it looks like. See suburbia in Kujwak. And looks all pretty there, doesn't it? And that's a good old winter shot. But why I'm telling you about this one here in this particular church there, this is the local Anglican church there, and this gentleman here attended the service there. 200 of the locals were there to attend another suicide. David here, who had 6 relatives who had committed suicide. 6 of his own family who had committed suicide. And you go, wow. And his nephew had also taken his life as well. The local mayor, Tano Napatak, who also has had relatives who have also committed suicide. And in that part of the world, in the Inuit or in the Northwest Territories, suicide is something like 25 times higher than the rest of Canada. 25 times higher. That was so high, they not only have memorial services, but in a place in Edmonton on the bridge there, they would even have, vigils, and they wanted to draw attention to it, of this paper mache there on it, to draw attention to suicide. And we know that during COVID, suicide in Australia was also markedly higher during that time, though not widely reported on in media. And when you had the mayor of Kujwak and the locals and all the various Canadian authorities, they're all scratching their head, wondering, what do we do? How do we handle this? What do we say? Well, they got all the various agencies like counsellors, psychologists, local leaders, coming up with various ideas on trying to help the young people. Look, there are complex issues. There's no question about that. And I'm not here to solve that today. But what my point is here is that they were bringing in various agencies to assist with what is a tragic occurrence here in this place. In Kujwak, it can be replicated in any other of these tiny villages around in the Inuit territory and also in the Northwest Territories as well. But here's my thing. What can you say? What does secular world have to say when it comes to this sort of thing? What can they offer? What can the secular world offer in terms of hope? Because at the very core of our being, we rely on hope and we are driven by hope. Far more than what you will ever realise. We are driven by hope. What can the secular world offer in this space? Not a lot, I don't think. A call for hope during a time of pain, Nunavak looks for solutions to the suicide crisis, but I wonder what solutions they were able to offer. Andrew Delbanco, who wrote The Real American Dream, and the premise of his book is that human beings need to organise inchoate sensations which we pass our days of pain, desire, pleasure, fear into a story. When that story leads somewhere, thereby helps us to navigate through its life, into the inevitable death, it gives us hope. So, here's that story. What story are we constructing? The secular story offers certain different things. We need to have an overall story. The secular world has dismantled the meta-narrative of the Christian story out of its world. And now, what has it got? Hopelessness. And that's why our society is deteriorating into a tribal world of division. And social justice, dressed in secularism, is trying to offer hope to the world through social justice and through that story. But at the end of the day, we're all aging, aren't we? We're all aging. And will be pushing up daisies sooner or later. Then what? You see, old Mark Falconer, who was an ABC international correspondent and who accidentally fell into the world of journalism and travelled the world and reported on various events. He developed myeloma, and he ended up passing away in cancer. But on his deathbed, he wanted to share his last words. I can't give you the exact quote because I have to leave a word out. But he says, "A marvellous life." A marvellous life was the tweet that came out. But then he passed away a couple of hours later. That marvellous life gave him a whole lot of experiences. Those experiences that he had took him to the far reaches of the world where he reported in wars in different places. It took him to the Sahara Desert, Europe, Britain, everywhere. And no doubt he did have lots of wonderful experiences that the world offered him, and so he could sit there on his bed and utter his last words, "A marvellous life." But then what? But then what? The secular world offers you this story. Adventism offers you another story. Which story do we really buy into? We hear it, we've heard it, we've listened to it, but have we really bought into it? Or do we have both side by side that ends up watering one down? What story are we listening to? We must imagine some end to life that transcends our only tiny allotment of days and hours if we are to keep at bay the dim back of the mind suspicion that one may drift into an absurd world. So, what Andrew Del Banchio is saying here, we must transcend our only tiny allotment. And all too often, we become so consumed about our world. But if our world is to have meaning, and we are looking for meaning to life, and story must have meaning, secular world tries to offer the meaning to that story. But we must somehow transcend our tiny little allotment. But do you know what the biggest industry at the moment is? And it's worth a staggering $4.4 trillion. Now, that's a lot of money in anyone's business. Do you know what it is? It's called self-care. Self-care. In other words, it's all about me. Self-care. I've got to look after uno numero. Number one. I've got to look after me. $4.4 trillion. Do you think that we are affected by that? We must transcend our only tiny allotment if we are to buy in to the story that Christianity offers. And I'd like to take you through to Peter. Let's go to Peter. And Peter has a very good solution and offers some meat to the bone for the story that we must have a part in of our lives. So we go to 1 Peter. Let's have a look at 1 Peter chapter 1. And Peter actually, in the passage of verse 3 to 12, is one big long sentence. Just one sentence. And so if there are any English professors here, they would say, or English teachers, they would say that sentence is too long. Well, it took a lot of skill for Peter to write that, and Peter's just a fisherman. Anyway, Peter here gives us some very important things here, but we won't have time to look at all 12 verses this morning. So, verse 3. He starts out with here, "Blessed be the God, our Father, Lord Jesus Christ, who, according to his great mercy, has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to obtain an inheritance which is imperishable, undefiled, and will not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice," Peter says, "even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold which is perishable, even though tested by fire, you may be found to result in praise and glory and honour, praise and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but you believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls." And in English we put a full stop there, and so we'll do the same. But Peter goes on for another couple of verses there to end that section, and then when he's talked about that, he then calls people to live a holy life. He calls Christians to live holy lives based on the kinds of values that we would talk about today. But the basis of those values or a holy life must be preceded by what Peter says here. So what does Peter say here? Let's just have a look a little bit again. "Blessed be God, the Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his great mercy has caused" what? A living hope. What else? He's caused us to be born again. Your versions might just say it slightly a little bit differently. To that living hope. So he's caused us to be born again and into a living hope because of what? Because of the resurrection. So, what does this mean for the local people? So, if you were a Gentile and you wanted to be a Jew, you would renounce everything of the Gentile world and then you would be incorporated into a legal status, sort of, like in our terms, you'll get that visa 468, and then you'll get your citizenship and that sort of thing. In order to get that citizenship into the Jewish world, you had to renounce everything that's related to the Gentile world. You would even renounce your legal status of your mother, sister, brother, relatives. And so they would be non-existent once you become a Jew. So in order to be born again, and Peter here is talking about the Christian version of it, but for the people back then, they had that concept of being born again as being incorporated into the Jewish world. But Peter adds another layer to that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so when you get that legal status as a Jew, you have disowned your mum, dad, and all your family. That's pretty radical stuff, isn't it? And that is a massive decision to say that you are no longer my mum and you no longer are my dad. Such is that legal status, and please don't take this wrong, such is that legal status, you could actually marry your sister legally. It wasn't practiced, by the way. It wasn't practiced. But you get the idea, don't you? Such was that legal status. And such a radical change. But Peter then adds another layer to being born again. What Peter is saying is not so much about your legal status, although you can relate that to God and your legal status, that you have been justified. We'll call that a legal status. But what Peter is talking about here is being. Being, all right? Knowing, being, and doing. So when we come to connecting with Christ, this is about God changing our hearts and our lives. This is about being and who we are, about transformation. That's what he's talking about. But this is based on hope, based on because of the resurrection. Now, hope. When I drove past I think it's the Glenorchy Anglican Church. I don't know if it's Anglican or Presbyterian. Doesn't really matter. But it had this sign here, and each morning I'd look at it as I was stuck in traffic there and going along at 2 k's an hour, and I'll look at this sign there out the front of the church, and it says, "Hope found here." Do you remember that? I wonder what you think Mark's reaction was to that sign. Really? Why would I think that? You know, when I first became an Adventist and they would talk about hope, hope in our definition is an unwieldy word. It's like pinning clouds down. It's vague. It's, you know, are you going to go away next year? What will we say? I hope so. So we have this idea that we attach to the word hope. There's that vagueness about it. And so when I see this sign, and I imagine a whole lot of other people would be thinking the same, hope found here. It doesn't sound inspiring, doesn't it? It doesn't sort of sound, man, I've got to really go in there, does it? And that's the problem with the English definition. We have quite a wide lexical definition or range for the word of hope. It's very wide, but not so in the New Testament. It was very, very tight. And, and the Hebrew word, it meant like a rope. And a rope was very strong, it was secure, and it was, you can't break ropes with your hands. So it was very strong, it was very secure. In the New Testament, it was firm, it was solid, you could count on it. Hope was secure. It wasn't vague like we have today. And so we have to sort of like get that out of our definition. Are you going to get to heaven? Oh, you hear people say, oh, I hope so. Oh, doesn't sound very reassuring, does it? But this wasn't the case when Peter wrote to the people back then. And so when he says here, we'll try this instead. All right. Blessed be the God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his great mercy has caused us to be born again. All right, so we can think of what passage here in Scripture in John chapter 3. All right, so if you're looking for what that means there, John chapter 3, to a living hope, something that is living through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to obtain the inheritance which is imperishable. And so this hope that you have here is a living hope that is, what word did he use? In what? Imperishable. Isn't that good news? Based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, you got first century people back then, their life was pretty tough. To get food, work, eke out a living, this to them would be good news, because they would be able to say, yes, this hope that we have is based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and this is imperishable. Imperishable. And so the crown that we have here is guarded by heaven. Isn't that great? That's good news, isn't it? But coming back to this hope for us here, just coming back to, sometimes we might get tripped over that vagueness again. If I can just use an illustration to reinforce this. I used to work at the sanitarium factory, had all sorts of jobs there, from packing Weet-Bix to boxing them and working in filling up the hoppers for the muesli, and occasionally you'd see some things crawling around in there that you shouldn't. Oh, that wasn't on YouTube, was it? Oh, yeah, maybe Jason, you better scrub that one out. But anyway, I remember one particular night, I had the privilege and honour to blanch soya beans. Marvellous job. Do you know what that is? Oh, it's highly recommended. If you're ever looking for a job that's really interesting and, invigorating and fulfilling, blanching soya beans is it. What you do is you wash soya beans, you have they're on a sack and they just sort of tip down onto a conveyor belt, and you pick out soya beans that are off colour and little twigs. And, I started at 3 o'clock. Oh, so 2 minutes past 3. 3 minutes past 3. Oh, we got till 7 o'clock to go. Oh, boy. I tell you what, 4 o'clock, I was about going off my tree. And what didn't help was that the bloke opposite me, he wasn't a lot of fun. So we couldn't even have a conversation, we couldn't even sort of talk with the night going by. And we you know, we've it took a long time to go through a whole sack, so there was no break. And, so we were sort of watching these soybeans going past intently on the conveyor belt, like this. Finally, we got the sack full and we were watching it, and I stopped the thing, and the bloke opposite me went zoom. He didn't stop with the conveyor belt, did he? So he just fell off his chair onto the floor. That was the highlight of the evening. Enjoyed that. I didn't know that was going to happen. Anyway, he abused me after that. But that is not a fulfilling job, is it? But someone's got to do it. Even at, the pay on doggy shift was about $20 an hour, which back then, about 1990, that was pretty good money, wasn't it? But still, does it fulfill hope and aspirations? No. What if I got paid $10,000 an hour? Well, where are those soya beans? Now, you imagine if there was a conversation over the conveyor belt and he's wondering why I'm looking happy and enjoying myself, and he's only getting paid $20 an hour. What's the difference? He's bored because he's only getting $20 an hour, but I'm feeling a little bit more fulfilled because I'm getting $10,000 an hour because my hopes and aspirations are, I'm getting something for it. And all of a sudden that sort of changes the whole thing. Now imagine here in the first century, they're not getting $10,000 an hour, but they are getting something that is imperishable, something that will last forever, something that they could look forward to. That you get a hope, not something that's vague, that is based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who offers you an imperishable crown. And because of that, you can, Peter then goes on to say this. All right, so Peter then goes, reading from verse 4, to obtain an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled and will not fade away in heaven for you, who are protected by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honour at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but you believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls. And so for first century Christians, who most were poor, agrarians of society, who were facing the challenges of everyday life, and added to that layer, they were being persecuted in different places mercilessly. Many were losing their lives, but Peter says here that you can face these various trials with what? You can face it with joy. You can face these trials with joy. That's odd to our thinking, isn't it? That's strange to our world, because in our world we want to be propelled painlessly through life. We don't like trials. But here, Peter says, and all this is in the present tense here, that you can endure these trials with joy. Why? Because of the resurrection. That's odd, isn't it? You're obviously having to think about that one, aren't you? That same experience, that same story that was given to first century Christians, and Peter himself was able to have that as a part of his own experience. That he was able to endure these trials and challenges and difficulties. Paul was able to do that, who was stoned, persecuted, lost his position and power. He was able to have that with joy. Why? Because he had that assurance of the hope that the apostles had a crown that was awaiting for them, guarded by heaven, assured by the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. They had that, and therefore they could endure this tiny allotment of life because they were able to look outside of that and have a hope that looked to the future. What does the secular world offer? It can't offer you that. The secular world will offer you things. It'll offer you money. It'll offer you material things. But it can't offer you anything more than this life only. That's not much hope, is it? Is it? I don't think it is. Each one of you sitting here today have a crown awaiting for you that is imperishable in heaven, guarded by God himself, guarded by Jesus Christ, because of the resurrection. And it is because of the resurrection that they call us to live holy lives. The secular world says you need to live an honourable life of, faith or trust and be nice to people, kind. They're all good things. But there's more to it than that. Why do we do that? Well, from a Christian perspective, we do that as an outflowing of what God has done in our lives, or what Jesus has done, based on we believe in him because of the resurrection. You remember Thomas. I will not believe unless I see him. 7 days later or 8 days later, Jesus appears in that room. Come and touch me. Touch the holes in my hands. Touch it on the side. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. You have seen and you have believed. But Thomas went from there, from a doubting Thomas, who as an apostle of Jesus Christ went to India to share the gospel, who doubted no more, who went through incredible trials. Why? Well, these trials are only temporary. There is a crown that awaits for me because I have seen the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We have the testimony. We have the testimony of the apostles, the testimony of 500 witnesses, the testimony of the soldiers that guarded the tomb that fell like dead men, who assured everyone that no one was going to steal the body of Jesus Christ. But yet they fell like dead men. Jesus rose, and the empty tomb there we can visit in Israel today. And we have the testimony of many people who have shown us that. Yet we still battle with the ire of secular world. And given our past record, and this is a brief history of tomorrow, written by Yuval Noah Harari, who predicted that given our past record and our current values, humanity's next target are likely to be what? Immortality, happiness, and divinity. We will now aim to overcome old age and even death itself. The secular world knows no bounds. On what basis is he basing that? Do you notice the title of the book? It's called Homo Deus, Latin for, fortunately it's in Latin. Homo Deus means God, Deus, God. Homo, man, being God. Here you've got an affront of the secular world that sets itself up in opposition. And Yuval Harari predicted that, and guess what? You got Bezos, who took up that challenge, who has invested an enormous amount of money to find, does anyone know? Something called the eternal gene. He wants to find the secret to eternity. And he is tipping in millions and millions, and along with other billionaires as well, and along with other very rich people, they are all tipping in large amounts of money into finding this eternal gene. And I couldn't resist this little cartoon here. Once my quest for immortality pays off, you'll be able to work for me forever. Oh, yeehaw. But God offers us that for eternity, and much more enjoyable, isn't it? Much more enjoyable. Yuval Noah Harari went on to say, currently the dominant human religion is liberalism, which holds that human beings are inherently valuable individuals with free will. Our inner experiences serve as the source of meaning in the universe and thus eliminate the need for a superhuman deity. You notice there? Our inner experiences serve as the source of meaning. Guess what a lot of people rely on? Why travel is so important? Why social media is so important? Because people rely on those inner experiences, what feels good, those emotional things that happen within us, and we are driven by that. We are all driven by that. But he's saying our inner experiences serve as the source of meaning in the universe and thus eliminate the need for superhuman deity. We've got to resist that in our lives. This belief system has allowed us to maintain a meaningful experience despite not having God to explain and order our lives. Liberalism is further responsible for many of the most important modern institutions. And today, hope has narrowed to the vanishing point of the self alone. There are two stories here. The world of the secular and the world in which Peter has offered us. The challenge for each of us here today is, yes, we can say, oh no, this one's wrong. The secular one is wrong. Of course we are not motivated by our inner emotional experiences of whatever feels good. Just in case you're wondering about that, a lot of people come and go with church for one reason or another. Oh, church doesn't do anything for me. Don't get anything out of the sermon. The preacher's boring. Dull as a dog's dinner. Governed by those inner experiences. We all want to do what we feel is okay for us at the time. The challenge that we have for us is that we believe that we can have both worlds. We believe that we can have the best of this one over here, merge with this one and say, oh yeah, but I still believe. But what we must be absolutely clear on is for us to write ourselves into the story that Peter is telling his hearers. Our world won't be lasting long. We can experience trials, and Peter, from his own experience, was able to experience trials and joy at the same time. Why? Because he had seen the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We sit here today of the hope that is found in Jesus Christ and the hope that is based on assurance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And just as Jesus rose from the dead to give us eternal life, so he is coming back again to give each one of us sitting here today a crown that is imperishable. Isn't that great news? Make sure that today when we go from here, that with that singularity of thought, that we write ourselves into that story of salvation. And so that we are very clear on how we live today and where our thoughts and where our priorities are, rather than mixing two. Jesus offers us that gift of life. Let us accept that. Peter says that we accept that by faith. That is our part in that. And we respond to that accordingly. And we have that assurance. Let us make sure we write ourselves into that story today.